Hello and welcome to The Print. This is Ratan Priya and I have V Raghunathan with us. He's going to talk to us about his new book, The Lion, the Admiral, and a Cat Called B. Uma Vijaylakshmi. Mr. Raghunathan has worn several hats in his lifetime. He's been a Navy cadet, he's been a professor, an academic, he writes columns, he was a CEO at one point, and this book is a tale of his adventures. So, when you were writing this book, I'm sure you were recognizing that this is a sort of a personal writing, and but it also comes out to be a self-help book. So, did it force you to look for meaning in your life experiences, or what was the motivation behind this?
Thank you, Priya. That's a fairly searching question. You see, the idea I broadly had in writing this book was that life in general can be pretty boring. And if you want to make it interesting, you look at life as a series of adventures. All the episodes in your life, if you view them as a series of adventures and yourself as the protagonist, then life becomes that much more fun. So, what I had tried to do was, though it was in a memoir format, it was, as the subtitle says, learnings from life and management. Now, I've had a range of experiences over my professional life. So, what I thought was, if various points, decision making points in life, how they affected me, how did I cope with them, how did I use different strategies at different times to get over those situations. I thought it will be motivational in the sense, you see, if you talk about an Einstein's biography, nobody relates to those people. Whereas
Yeah.
I am an average guy and any average person can relate to me. What I can be, anybody else can be. Not everybody can be an Einstein or a Sachin Tendulkar. So the
Hmm.
idea was that don't make it a in your face motivational book.
Right.
Bring some messages in a subtle manner and impart something, because I've been a teacher for 20 years at IIM Ahmedabad and thereafter at Schulich School of Business and so on, and internationally I've been teaching in Europe for 25 years. So the idea was that I communicate the lessons from my own life, but not in a in your face manner, but in a way which people can, an average professional can relate to, an average youngster can relate to, and even the older generation who want to see the transition of India from 1970s till today, that is over the last 50 years. So that is what was the motivation underlying the book.
Yeah. That's that truly comes out. Also, I think, and so far with the with this kind of writing, so you see, when people say if you want really want to know yourself, the kind of self discovery that people talk about, you have to try different things. Do you think you were trying on different things throughout your career to know yourself better, or because you knew yourself better, that is why you were willing to do different things?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know myself at all. I was a very, very average kid. As I tell somewhere in the book, when I graduated, I was only 17 years old.
Yeah.
So I was obviously not mature enough to know what I wanted. I wasn't a top of the class student. I wasn't 17 at graduation because I was brilliant. I was 17 at graduation because my father made a mistake admitting me in school and put me 2 years above rather than at the right level. But the
Yeah.
parental expectation was that you will do well in the academics, that you should be in the top 3 or 4, and so on. So I used to really work my butt off, and whatever I did was, above my pay grade in many ways. So in that sense, even when I graduated with a BSc Physics, Chemistry, and Mathematics, I had no clue what I was going to be doing in my life. I could well have ended up as probably in a clerical grade in a bank or something, because those days jobs were few and far between. My grades were not good enough even to crack a good engineering college, leave alone an IIT or something. And I was a very average kid. But I put my story as a story that if life is a marathon, good start is irrelevant. In a marathon, a good start is irrelevant, unlike in a sprint. So therefore, even though I was not from an IIM, I was from Sanatan Dharam High School, I was from Sanatan Dharam College, and so on. But finally, I made my life count by sheer hard work. And hard work can very easily substitute intelligence. That is some kind of a lesson that I impart in the book. That if you work hard enough for a long enough time in life, nobody can tell whether you're a hard worker or you're very bright. One substitutes for the other, and hard work stands longer in life actually.
Right.
So I didn't know what I was doing, but at every stage I had only one mantra, that if you worked harder than anybody else, then you'll go further than anybody else, given that you are otherwise average. So, in whatever, after the age of 15 or 16, I started getting serious about whatever I was doing. And I would make sure that I would try and work really, really, really hard. For almost 30 years of my life, from the age of 15 till the age of 45, I barely slept 4 hours a night. I would seldom sleep before 3 o'clock in the night and get up by 4 in the morning. And that's why I very confidently tell people that nobody ever died of hard work, because I worked hard. And the
Hmm.
only thing going for me was, if others slept 8 hours a day and I slept 4 hours a day, I would go twice as far as them because I was working hard. So in the process, I never thought I will be found as a teacher in my life ever. But I ended up 20 years of my life as a teacher. But then it was management discipline. Management is not a pure discipline like physics or history where you can just teach. You
Yeah.
have to do ultimately if you want to prove yourself. That is how I became a CEO of a bank. And I came from a very different world, so I thought very differently. So I brought some of my experiences of that. I brought some of my experience as an academic. I brought some of my experiences later after the banking. I was heading a foundation. So I brought a series of my experiences, which were essentially 20 years as an academic and 20 years as a CEO. uh, what situations I came across, how did I use parallel thinking or lateral thinking to solve my problems? And I reduced all of these into stories and brought out this book. So, yes, I was never clear about what I was doing in life, and it was a sense of discovery throughout.
It is all very inspiring. So, since you mentioned your father, how were your parents supporting you in all this time? For example, how did they react when you told them that you don't want to be in the Navy Academy?
In fact, that was a big problem for me because I had joined the Indian Navy after an MBA in those days.
Yeah.
And nobody thought that after an MBA you will do anything other than a corporate job. And
Mm.
I fought with my parents to join the Navy. And then I had to depend on my parents to bail me out by paying money to get me out of Navy. So it was the most embarrassing, most difficult, and most uncomfortable period of my life. But I knew one thing, that having made a mistake, I didn't want to live with the mistake. I
Yes.
knew that joining Navy had been a mistake for whatever reasons, and I didn't view it as a failure because of the way I have narrated the story. One would see why I thought being in a cul-de-sac and trying to say I will not give up is not an answer. It is stupid actually, beyond a point, if you say I will not get out of a cul-de-sac. So yes, it was a very, very difficult period, but I think on the whole, my parents are very, very supportive. All said and done, they never made a heavy weather of my decisions. They said, "All right, son, your experience has come at a price, but we do hope you have learned whatever lessons you needed to learn from it." And then I worked hard at trying to improve my own, biodata, so to speak, by investing in myself. That is how I went to IIM Calcutta at that stage. By working hard, I was able to do that and get myself a decent PhD and then get into the teaching line at IIM Ahmedabad for 20 years.
If we go back to the Navy Academy, you the way you're telling your about your training days, it's very removed from all the pride and adulation we see military men talking when they talk about their training days and that sort of thing. So do you think, and you're very clear about the kind of reform that navy training, military training could use at the end of the chapter, would you would you like to take a stand on this interview right now and share your views on what sort of reforms that training could use?
Actually, I say that at two levels. At one level, in my immature mind of a 20-year-old, I talk about the need for reforms.
Yeah.
But at another level, where I talk about the Admiral, I already make it clear that the training was along the right lines, because that is what the Admiral makes me realize even at that stage. So, with maturity, as I look back, I think the training was by and large quite all right. But in my immature mind of a 20-year-old, I thought, no, highly educated people needed very different kind of treatment. But that is not where I was. I was there on the basis of my BSc, and
Hmm.
they were trying to make a decent sailor out of me and
Yeah.
preparing me for war conditions, because I was in the execution branch, executive branch as they call it, where I could have been posted on a frigate or a submarine or aviation or whatever. So if you are going to be a fighter, you needed to be trained in a certain way. It's a different matter that I went in after an MBS, therefore I had some highfalutin probably thoughts in my mind in my immaturity. So my expectation of training of Navy was immature. What the Admiral made me realize was the matured thinking of what the training was all about, which I've tried to bring out in the book. But that's why I put Admiral Pereira among one of the greatest admirals the country has had, who could deal with a 20-year-old and
Hmm.
spend 45 minutes communicating what they were trying to do. And I have never learned, I have never left Navy with a regret. I was very clear that I wanted to leave, but I don't think I have any great advice to give to the Navy on how to do their training. I think they were doing a great job.
Would you like to answer a question about India's economy? Maybe there you have something to give us.
Okay. You see, India is a land of enormous
Let's let's talk
opportunities.
about let's talk about India's current economic standing and if there is something wrong with it.
Right. You see, one problem with India's situation is we always talk about India's potential in the world affairs. We say India has a potential to be the second richest, third biggest economy. By 2047, India will be a superpower, and so on and so forth. The problem is, India is seldom spoken about in present tense, either as a financial powerhouse or as a military powerhouse. 1.4 billion people, we are still not in the Security Council. So, India is a very complex country, very difficult to govern country, a country of enormous variables with all kinds of extremes. So India's challenges are cut out for it, irrespective of the government, which may be at the helm at any given
Hmm.
point in time. The fact is, Indian economy has challenges where 60% of the country's population earns less than $2 a day, where jobs may be there, but most of them are underemployment. They may not be unemployment, but it's a huge underemployment. Skill levels in India are pathetic. We have very little respect for physical labor, and therefore the skill levels, whether you talk about plumbing or carpentry or any of the physical labor, the skill levels are pathetic compared to anywhere else in the world. So the opportunities are huge, but what we are tapping is a very, very minimal of that. And that's the reason why I believe India has to believe in respect for manual labor. Without that, jobs for the millions upon millions that we are talking about will never ever be possible. India has to worry about the population, the health parameters, the illiteracy parameters. We talk about literacy being 80%. But our definition of literacy is pathetic, If you look at, that's why it's very well known that 80% of our graduate or even engineers are unemployable, you know. So as a consequence, while the potential may be huge, what we are tapping, our productivity levels are among the most abysmal in the world. Our productivity levels, look at agriculture. Elsewhere in the world, 2% of the population supports 98% of the population. In India, 45% of the population supports the remaining 55%. That shows what our productivity in agriculture is. And the same thing is true of manufacturing sector and services sector and so on. So I'm not a big optimist when it comes to India's potential being tapped. Potential existing, yes, but potential tapped, no. So I am a bit of what do you call? I will not call myself a pessimist, but I am a realist. And whatever I see, you see, everybody can talk about 2047 because who will be there in 2047 to be answerable to their predictions today? It's
Yeah.
all very, 2020 was a vision document by none other than our former president, Dr. Abdul Kalam. No, 2020 has come and gone, and where are we? Where has that vision gone? So that is why everybody makes predictions 20 years later because you're not going to be around to be answerable to it. So that's my, I'm a very fond parent like feeling for India. I have a fond parent like feeling for India. I love my country, but I will not necessarily say that I'm proud of everything that I see in my country.
Who is B. Uma Vijaylakshmi, the cat?
Well, the fact is, as far as the Lion and the Admiral are concerned, there's a full-fledged chapter on each of them. As far as B. Uma Vijaylakshmi is concerned, it was just a passing story, which is a one paragraph story in a whole chapter, where we, out of fun, we were naming a cat which was a hostel mascot, so to speak, at IM Calcutta. And we had a competition to name the cat. And for whatever reason, the winning name was B. Uma Vijayalakshmi. Now, that there might have been a student by that name, or that there might have been a teacher by that name, are all circumstantial and not really important. So the whole idea was, why should cats have very peculiar names like Alexander or something of the kind? And why not have a very day-to-day name? And that is where it came from. And it was just in a passing phase, and it is a coat hanger as far as the book title is concerned. While two out of the three named in the title are proper chapters, whereas one of them is for a lark.
You say in your book that a lot of your book titles were picked out by your wife. Is this one also by Meena?
Absolutely. In fact, almost 10 out of my 15 books have been named by my wife, and this is one of them too. She is
Nice.
my editor. My pre editing editor is my wife. So when she edits, she also thinks about a title and so on. And she, of course, suggests other structural improvements and so forth. But in the process, she almost invariably ends up suggesting a few titles, and I pick one of them. And I usually found it works for me. So I don't
Hmm.
negotiate very hard.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating title. So
Yes.
about writing, uh, you have a very matter of fact style of telling things, and in that your humor comes out. Do you feel sometimes restricted by your wit and humor in order to say things in a fun way, or is it like you're the by making things a little witty and humorous, the writing comes easy? How is it for you?
Good question. But the answer is pretty simple. It's
Yeah,
my very natural style. In fact, a lot of the people who know me well tell me that I write exactly as I speak.
yeah, it's a very matter of
So,
fact.
yeah, to me, what I write or the wit part comes very naturally. And, if you are without any humor in life, life is less interesting, you know. You are less interesting as a person if some humor doesn't come out of you. And I think I have learned it. I was a big fan of Mark Twain in my time and so forth. So, I love people who write with a good sense of humor. And I do try to emulate, hoping that an iota of that comes into my writing. And it
Yeah.
comes reasonably naturally to me. I don't have to work very hard at bringing humor.
So you don't feel restricted by a
No,
humor.
not
But
at all, not at all. Because any good story will be a little humorous, is my take,
yeah.
you know. Otherwise, it will not be a very good story. It will be a tragic kind of a story which will
Yeah.
lack all humor.
See, you've written, you write columns which are on very heavy topics, and you've been an academic writer. You've written papers and all. In academic books, you have your chapters, and you've written books like these. So, do you think, do you have a preference? Some people like to do personal like writing a little more than other kinds of nonfiction. Do you have a preference?
As a matter of fact, no, because each one has had its place.
Yeah.
Like my column writing is my cathartic process. I feel very strongly about a lot of things, whether it is India's problems, India's challenges, India's poverty, India's economy, or whatever it may be over the last 4 decades or so. I've been a columnist for most major newspapers at one time or the other, if not continuously, though probably the Economic Times was the longest that I held a column. So to me, each had its own phase. When I was an academic, I had to write academic papers. And to me, that was my bread, butter, and enjoyment. Columns gave me a cathartic process. I enjoyed it throughout, and I continue to enjoy it even today.
Hmm.
The writing of the kind that I do for Penguin, HarperCollins, or Westlands of the world are my fun writing, unconstrained, no purpose, no economics necessarily, just whatever catches my fancy. So almost all of them have a place in their lives and in their time of my life, and therefore there's been no constraint for any of them, and I've enjoyed all of them equally.
Okay. I was quite surprised when by the end of the book we reached this paragraph where you've written that quite frankly, story of my life is quite meh, and you go on to describe how you were a medium-sized fish in a medium-sized pool.
Yes, absolutely.
As a writer myself, I find it very difficult to write something and not want it to be perfect, like self-censoring and those sort of things.
Yeah,
And your chapter on writing is completely opposite. Your advice to writers is to write, not to think about what will come of it. Can you
right.
talk about that more?
That's very true, actually, because one of the biggest challenges of writing is consistency and perseverance. Sitting on your table as a matter of habit.
Yeah.
Many of them, before they start writing, they talk about a writer's block and what have you. To me, that's an affectation. If you sit on your table long enough, you will write something. It may not be great, but that great writing will happen only when you have logged in your 10,000 hours, to quote the famous outliers kind of a thing. Unless you put in your 10,000 hours, you don't get anywhere. And that's what I mean by saying, you see, I say may because I've written more than 15 chapters with popular publishers. But if you type in Bangalore based authors, my name doesn't even figure.
Mm.
Now, because maybe I don't market myself, Maybe I don't write in a niche repeatedly because it's only niche writers who get to be known in that niche and they become well known. Whereas I write on each of my book is more or less different, completely different from each other. So in that sense, I write for my enjoyment. I don't lose too much sleep that I'm not a famous author. I don't miss too much sleep that I'm not a Nobel winning academic or a Pulitzer winning author or whatever. As long as I have exploited my potential to the fullest, as I said, what is God given and what you make of it. As long as I'm happy that I made the best version of Raghunathan, I'm happy. And I think I am at that level where I think I'm operating at the best version of Raghunathan, and that is good enough for me.
That's a very nice thing to hear, and one would want to follow this to stay
Thank
motivated.
you.
You're quite
Thank you.
harsh on procrastinators, and when you talk about writer's block, also, I can't believe that you've never felt a block. You've never felt like you can't go on with another sentence.
No, that is the discipline you need. And some people say, "Oh, I must be making sacrifices." Yeah,
Hmm.
sure, I don't play golf, I don't while away time in a pub drinking beer, but that is hardly a sacrifice because I love what I do more than something else. If I didn't, I would do that other thing rather.
Yes.
So, in other words, when you are passionate, and the whole trick in life is about being passionate about whatever it is that you do. So people ask me which part of my life have I enjoyed most. I tell them my 20 years in IIM Ahmedabad teaching some of the brightest students was in some ways a fascinating phase of my life. My 4 years of being a CEO of a large bank was fascinating in its own way. My 15 years as a CEO of a large foundation where I was dealing with 10,000 students from socioeconomically challenged backgrounds and running three hospitals and several institutions, including a large engineering college, degree college, and schools, was fascinating in its own right. Writing columns has been fascinating in its own right. Having been an author of more than 15 books, I say more than 15 books because I also written some nursery rhyme books in Hindi. No, I don't know whether to count that as books or not.
They are
So,
books.
so they are all fascinating in their own ways. And in that sense, every chapter of my life has been fascinating. So the trick in life is to enjoy whatever it is that you're doing, enjoy the moment, and life takes care of itself.
You also one of your big advices is for writers to read, and if you don't read, you won't be able to write.
You
That's
can't
pretty much
write.
very logical. So can you tell us, to our viewers and readers, three books that you think is important, regardless of if they want to be a writer or not? Three books which you think are very important for people, for an individual to read,
You see,
according.
it depends what one is reading for. If one is reading for wit, it's a very different book. If one is reading for economics, it's a very different book. If one wants to read history, it's a very different book. If one wants to read mysteries, it's a very different book. And to be honest, I read all kinds of books from Simon Singh's Mathematics to
Okay,
Jeffrey Archer's
we
bestsellers.
can
I read everything.
we can zero it down. If you have to recommend personal writing, memoirs, for people who want to write uh, about themselves, what books they should read?
Ah, that's interesting. Uh, I'll just start with The Lion, the Admiral, and a cat called B. Uma Vijaylakshmi.
Very good. Good one.
Because it's the kind of a book you can replicate. If I
Yes.
gave you names of some very big authors, they may be very difficult acts to follow.
Yeah. Two more. You can give us two more books.
On the memoirs. Okay. You see, in many ways, many books are memoirs, though not said in so many ways. Like even Charles Dickens, in many ways, is a memoir.
Yeah.
It's a commentary of the times, part of his own childhood, borrowed from it, and so forth. So that's also memoirs, which I love. Nehru's, the letters to his daughter are
Yeah.
great memoirs, worth reading for anybody.
Yes.
I can't imagine a father writing better set of letters to their offspring. So, I could list a whole lot of them, but that will be a very subjective exercise. Let us say, as long as you enjoy a memoir, read it.
Hmm. Among all of your 15 books or more, which do you think is your best work?
In some ways, if I were to count a little more serious books, Irrationally Rational is
Hmm.
one of the very comprehensive books, because instead of reading 30 different books on behavioral economics, this
Hmm.
single book will give you the works of the 10 major Nobel laureates who transitioned from neoclassical economics to behavioral economics at one place. So it's a serious book. Again, it's written with a bit of wit and humor,
Hmm.
not a dry reading at all, like many economic books on economics could read like. So that's one favorite that I have. If you want a book on lateral thinking, my favorite is Locke's Mahabharata and Mathematics,
Okay. I will
where I
note.
tell stories from Mahabharata and I weave some parallel of those stories with some locks which have something in parallel, and then some parallel with some mathematical principles which have something in parallel with the stories as well as the locks. So it's a very interesting book on lateral thinking, which is a very interesting book in some ways. My most well known book is Games Indians Play,
Hmm.
which may not be my personal best, but it is the, in terms of marketplace of the numbers sold, it's been a national bestseller. Games Indians Play, so I might as well include that, among the more fun books. But that was the first one, incidentally, in my series of 15 books with the popular publishers outside the academia. So yeah, so and I love my book Duryodhana, which looks at Mahabharata from Duryodhana's perspective. I love that. So, well, to
All
me, it's like asking which of your child is your favorite. They're all favorites.
since you mentioned that book on locks, I want to know what is it with locks and you? What can you tell our viewers? What joy do you find looking at padlocks and collecting them?
A fair question. You see, some people are acquisitive, some are not. I was an acquisitive kid even as a youngster. I used to collect matchbox covers and, of course, stamps and coins and so on. And I had a deep interest in anything mechanical and anything old.
Okay.
So, had I been born probably to a very rich person, I might have been collecting clocks or watches or cars and so on. But I accidentally started collecting locks, and that story figures in my book, how my hobby started and so forth. So I will not repeat it here. But yes, so the fact that they are mechanical and the fact that they have a vintage going back hundreds of years was my major this thing. But important thing was enjoying the entire process, not just the locks, but the way you go about searching for them, the way you negotiate, the way you make three trips and succeed only once. In fact, last week I returned from a lock collector's meet in Germany, Breisach, which is a small town near Basel, and I just came back 4 days ago. I picked up this beautiful, beautiful lock, which was taken away from India, which the second pair of that exists in a museum. I have the picture of that. It's a it's a man sitting on a horse. That is the lock. But when you unlock it, the man is detached from the lock and he is pulling the horse by a rope with a sword in one hand. So, but
Wow.
when you lock it, the rider sits on the horse and the lock is fully closed. So every part in the lock is a moving part, but it's a museum piece going back to the late 18th century. So I have passion even today. I paid an arm and a leg for that lock, but the sheer happiness of collecting it, of getting the dealer to part with it, was
Yeah.
such a rewarding experience. So that is what a good hobby is all about, and that is, if you are in that place, you have found your spot.
I think that's the kind of self-discovery we want to reach at.
Yes, absolutely. In every aspect of life, for that matter. You see, not all of us are Sachin Tendulkars or Mozarts who are geniuses at the age of 3 in
Hmm.
whatever it is that they do. We all come across our professions very accidentally. But the
Yeah.
trick in life lies in how to fall in love with whatever it is that came your way and
Yeah.
genuinely fall in love with it
Hmm.
and then let it develop. You know, to be a genius is something which you are born with. I will not give credit to a Sachin Tendulkar or Mozart so much, though what they achieved is not possible without those 10,000 hours and more. But the genius is the big part of what they are.
Yeah.
Whereas for most of lesser mortals like us, that genius is not a given, you know. So
Well, it's
it is
always
whatever it is comes your way that you make something of it is where the trick of life lies with us lesser mortals.
exactly. It's always anyway. It's always hard work over talent.
Absolutely. And nobody ever makes it truly big with both genius and hard work. Then they
Yeah.
become the Nobel laureates of the world, so to speak, or Mozarts of the world, so to speak, or
Thank
Sachin Tendulkars of the world, so to speak.
yes. Yes. Thank you so much for speaking to me. It was
Thank you,
true.
Priya. You've been asking very interesting questions. You made my day. It's been such fun talking to you.
It was so fun talking to you too. It was true pleasure. And your
Thank
book
you.
is a delight to read. And
Thank you. Coming from an editor like you, it's big praise and I feel honored. Thank you.